Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Kowalski, your reading coach, here to read Chapter 9 of the Invention of Hugo Cabret. Where we last left off, Hugo had been working for the old man in the toy shop, but he still wasn't sure that the notebook was destroyed or not destroyed. And the little girl, Isabel, had promised him that she would help him try to look for the notebook. And she and he had met in a bookstore where they met another interesting fella named Etienne. And Etienne worked at the movie theater and was going to sneak them into the movie theater. But he also Hugo was about to steal a book from the bookstore. And what Etienne did was the book was on magic tricks, and he pulled a coin out of his eye patch and gave it to Hugo so he didn't have to steal it, so he could buy it. So the next chapter is chapter 9, and it's called The Key. The Key. So let's see. That night, after all of the clocks had been inspected and cleaned, Hugo opened the magic book. He read it from cover to cover and then reread his favorite parts, memorizing whole sections, practicing with whatever he could find around his room. But even as he fanned out his cards or rolled a coin across the back of his fingers, he found himself thinking about Isabel. Hugo finally put the book down. She said she would try to help him get his notebook back. Isabel had called him her friend. But how could he be her friend when he had so many secrets? He didn't have any secrets to keep when he was friends with Antoine and Louis. He wished that Isabel would just go away. Before he got ready for bed, Hugo took out the mechanical man and he looked through all the little parts that he had stolen since he started working at the booth. Suddenly, it was as if light went on in his head. Hugo saw with just a little work how one of the pieces could fit into the man's arm socket. He pulled out his toolkit and cut and filed the metal, bending it until it finally snapped neatly into place. For the first time, Hugo had fixed something on the mechanical man without the guidance from the notebook. His heart beat hard. What if he could fix the mechanical man without the notebook at all? After all, who knew how long that old man was going to make him work? And what if the girl was still lying and the notebook really was burned? He wasn't sure he could do it, but until the notebook was actually in his hands, he'd try. The week passed quickly. Hugo was more tired than ever. He hardly got any sleep because at the end of the day, after taking care of the clocks and working at the booth, he would stay up until dawn working on the automaton. He made much progress, and he knew that he was getting very close to finishing. When the time came to meet Isabel and Etienne at the theater, he didn't want to break his promise, so he made excuses to the old man, left the station, and ran to the cinema. He snuck around the back where he found Isabel waiting for him. "Papa George must have hidden your notebook really well," she said, "but I think I have an idea of where it might be." Hugo wondered if he should remind her not to look inside it, but he decided not to. "Why doesn't he want you to go to the movies?" Hugo asked. "I don't know. Maybe he thinks it's a waste of time. He's never said why. I bet my parents would have let me go to the movies." Isabel looked at Hugo as if she was hoping he would ask her a question about her parents, but he didn't, so she just kept talking. "My parents died when I was a baby," said Isabel, "and Papa George and Mama Jean were my godparents, so they took me in and raised me. They are very nice, except when it comes to the movies." Hugo said nothing in response, so finally Isabel said, "I wonder where Etienne is. He usually opens the door for me by now." Hugo cautiously slipped around to the front of the theater and looked for him. The manager of the theater, whose thin black hair was slicked across the top of his head, opened the door and said to Hugo, "What do you want?" The cigarette that dangled from his lips moved up and down as he spoke. I'm looking for Etienne." The man stared at him. "He has an eye patch," said Hugo. "I know who Etienne is," said the man, as he smoothed his hair across his head and flicked his ashes towards Hugo. "I just fired him. We discovered that he was sneaking children into the theater. Isn't that a terrible thing to do? He glared at Hugo. Hugo backed away from the door, ran behind the theater, and told Isabel what happened. What an awful man. Follow me, Isabel said. She walked to the rear door, took out a bobby pin from her pocket. Hugo watched as she fiddled with the pin inside the lock until it clicked, and the door opened. How did you learn to do that? Said Hugo. Books, said Isabel. Isabel poked her head inside to make sure no one was watching and then held the door open for Hugo. They entered the back of the lobby where the photographs from the upcoming films were tacked to a display case. Isabel stopped for a moment and looked at one of the pictures, a black and white photograph of an actress with very dark eyes. Sometimes I think I like these photos as much as I like the movies, she said. You can even make up your own story when you look at a photo. Hugo looked at the picture, but then Isabel said, Quick, quick, the manager's coming. She and Hugo hurried from the lobby into the theater, sank down into the soft red velvet seats in the back row, and waited for the movie to start. And there's the curtain. The curtain opening. There's the projector light. And we have... Oh, look at that look on Hugo's face. He looks like he's super excited to see that movie. The blank white screen reminded Hugo of a brand new piece of paper, and he loved the wonderful whirring sound from the projector that filled the theater. First came the newsreels, each one a few minutes long, about current events around the world. There was one about the Depression in America, one about a World's Fair that would be opening in Paris in just a few months. Hugo thought that sounded exciting, although he knew he would never be able to go. There was one about politics in Germany, and then finally a cartoon began. It was called The Clock Store. In it, an old man was lighting street lamps as night fell, and he passed the clock store. Inside, all the clocks were alive, and they were dancing to classical music. Hugo knew his father would have loved it. In the end, the music grew wilder as two alarm clocks had a fight. The curtains closed, everyone applauded, and the projectionist changed the reels. After a few moments, the curtains opened again, and the main feature, The Million, by a director named Rene Clair, began. It was about an artist, a lost lottery ticket, a criminal, a borrowed coat, and an opera singer. And it had one of the most amazing chase sequences that Hugo could ever imagine. He thought every good story should end with a big, exciting chase. Time passed quickly in the darkness, and as the lights came up, Hugo didn't want the afternoon to end. He and Isabel looked at each other, their eyes still shining from the flickering images. Everyone filed out of the theater until the children were alone in their seats in the back of the room. Hugo stared at the screen as if he were still seeing the projected light and hearing the sound. Suddenly, Hugo and Isabel were grabbed by their collars and hoisted to their feet. How did you two get in here? Said the manager. Cigarette ashes fell on their heads. The children managed to take their coats and were dumped outside on the wet sidewalk in front of the theater. And I better not see you here again. The manager closed the glass doors, wiped his hands, and glared at them until they ran away, brushing ash from their hair. Once they were out of sight of the theater, they slowed down to a walk. The air was cold, and they shivered. Isabel told Hugo about other movies she loved, comedies, cartoons, cowboy movies, and another movie about someone named Tom Mix. There was an actress she had seen named Louise Brooks who had a haircut that Isabel copied. There were adventure stories and mysteries, love stories, fantasies. She said names like Charlie Chaplin and Jean Renoir and Buster Keaton. Hugo had seen a few Buster Keaton movies and 2 Charlie Chaplin movies, but for some reason, he didn't share this with Isabel. He just listened. Soon they arrived back at the station. As they entered the waiting room, Hugo noticed someone standing very still, looking up at the main clock, taking notes on a clipboard. It was the station inspector. Hugo grabbed Isabel and ducked behind a bench nearby. He rubbed the buttons on his coat. "What are you doing?" Isabel said, straightening herself up. Hugo was lost in thought. Had the station inspector begun investigating and found out that Hugo's uncle was gone? Hugo couldn't be taken away now, not when he was so close to finishing The Mechanical Man. He knew he shouldn't have gone to the movies. He should have never left the station. Hugo's heart raced. He had to get into those walls to check the clocks, but Isabel was still talking. He hadn't heard anything she had said for the last few minutes. When he thought it was safe, he got up and started walking in the opposite direction from the station inspector. "Answer me, Hugo," she said, and caught onto his arm. "Don't just run away." "I've got to go." "That's what I mean. Go where? I was asking you where you lived." Hugo stopped short and stared at her. "I don't know anything about you," she said. "You know where I live. You know about my parents. If we're going to be friends, then I think I should know about you. And why won't you tell me?" Suddenly, Hugo started to run. "Hugo!" she yelled. "Stop! Wait for me!" And there she ran through the station. Crowded station. Uh-oh. There she is falling down. Right? There she is. There's Hugo. He looks concerned. He sees her. He's heading back towards her. And he offers his hand. It's a sign of friendship, right? He doesn't know whether to trust her, but he's offering his hand. And she's taking it, and uh-oh. It was called The Key. The chapter is called The Key. Hugo helped Isabel to her feet, but he couldn't stop staring at the key. Isabel noticed and tucked it back into her dress. "Where did you get that?" Hugo whispered. "Tell me where you live." Neither of them said a word. Without a warning, Isabel started running again, and this time Hugo chased her. Finally, she stopped at a cafe table and sat down, out of breath. Hugo sat down too. One of the train station pigeons walked up to their table and pecked at the crumbs on the floor. "Why are you so interested in that key?" Isabel demanded. "Tell me where you got it." A steam engine whistled, and its deafening shriek, which completely drowned out all the other sounds of the station for a moment, made Hugo jump, as it always did. Hugo and Isabel stared at each other until the owner of the cafe came and made them get up and leave. And then they parted ways without even saying goodbye. And that is the end of Chapter 9. Chapter 10, The Notebook. So, again, I wonder why this key is so very important to Hugo. What could it possibly mean? Is the key like some kind of part that he needs? I mean, it seems kind of big to be something to make the mechanical man work. I don't know. And it seemed for a little bit that Isabel and Hugo were starting to become friends. So I wonder where that's going to go. If they're actually going to become friends and help each other or not. Anyway, the next chapter will tell us more. See you soon.